What's up, everyone? It is time for my full review of the live-action The Little Mermaid movie. First, though, brief recap for you. So I have liked, not loved, most of the Disney live-action adaptations. I do love Cinderella. That one is my favorite for its classic feel, but I also really dig something like Maleficent, Mistress of Evil for the really big swings that it takes. The others, however, mostly hover in a middle zone. They're all pretty well-made films, but the question becomes, do they have the same magic as their animated predecessors, or do they add enough new magic? And for most of them, the answer to that question for me would be not really, and I do have to say the same is true for this Little Mermaid movie. I have a feeling most of you out there know the story, but just in case, The Little Mermaid is about Ariel, a mermaid who longs to be where the people are. I'll kick off the review here with what I think is the absolute best part of this film. It's Halle Bailey's performance as Ariel. I already was well aware of what a talented singer she was going into this screening, but there is an especially intoxicating quality to the sound of her voice singing these particular songs. You hear her sing something like, let's say, Part of Your World, and it cuts through. You feel her longing, you're taken by that longing, and immediately you want to see her get what she's been dreaming of. But then the question does become, is the same true of Bailey's performance when she is not singing, especially when the character's silent? And the answer to that question is a resounding yes. She's phenomenal across the board in this film. That same ache to get and to experience more is always there in her performance, and it's a very effective driving force of the film overall. On top of that, I was also very impressed by the chemistry that Bailey was able to spark with nearly every character featured in this film. One of the most impressive connections of the bunch for me was the one between Bailey and Jonah Hauer-King, because going into The Little Mermaid, if I were to list off a bunch of things that I was excited to see in live action form, admittedly, the Ariel-Eric relationship probably wouldn't be super high up on that list, but in the end, that really wound up being one of the things I found playing best throughout the movie, and it was actually one of the things that I found myself most invested in as well. And I really do think that a lot of that comes from what Bailey and Hauer-King in particular were able to spark with one another. And he's just great in general. He really came across to me as an actor with a whole lot of very natural screen presence, and I also thought I started to pick up on these little nuances that he brought to the role of Eric that really just felt purely him to me. Like no other actor would have brought the character to screen that way other than him. Just these little subtleties in delivery, facial expression, and just the overall way he carries himself as Eric. As for Ariel's digital friends now, Sebastian was my personal favorite in terms of character design, Daveed Diggs' voice performance, and then also how he's worked into the story overall. Jacob Tremblay's Flounder is solid but didn't make as much of an impression, and I have a feeling it's got a lot to do with the fact that that character is sidelined more often than the others. However, I did quite like Awkwafina's work as Scuttle, and I feel like this might be divisive, but Scuttlebutt grew on me and it's an earworm I don't mind having. This next point that I'm about to make, it is a small thing, but I did want to point it out because I know there were a whole lot of questions about it, and also because it did take me out of the movie. Briefly, but it took me out of the movie. It's this whole thing with Scuttle going underwater and talking, and since seeing the movie, I did go and Google it, and apparently seagulls can swim and hold their breath underwater, but while watching the film, it played as a head-scratching moment for me. It comes and goes very, very quickly, and I got right back into the film after it, but I did have to point that out because it took me out of the movie even for a short period of time. One of the important relationships in Ariel's life that didn't play well enough for me, however, here is her relationship with her father, Javier Bardem's King Triton. The movie is already a bit on the long side, especially for younger moviegoers. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes long, so I don't want to recommend making it longer, but that is one element of the story that is noticeably weaker and thinner to me because it doesn't get enough screen time. And then even when it does, it often lacks nuance and a palpable sense of history. So what winds up happening is Triton's actions can come across as rash, unjustified, and even kind of cruel at times. That continued to be an issue for me throughout the whole film, where I just never felt the weight of that relationship, and therefore I wasn't rooting as hard for them to reconcile as I was for other things playing out in the film. Somewhat similarly here, I don't think what they try to establish between Triton and Ursula works very well, but I will point out, Melissa McCarthy certainly makes up for any weaker plot point via that commanding, devilish performance that I just plain old could not get enough of. Poor Unfortunate Souls is one of my favorite songs in this film, and just overall, Melissa McCarthy is going big with this character in all the right ways. Very much understood this assignment. That right there could pave the way nicely to talking about the effects in the film, because one of my favorite visuals comes at the tail end of the film, and it focuses on Ursula-style destruction. Just a stunning looking set piece where you could also feel the threat of what she's doing, which I think is very important. Not all the digital effects look as good as that moment, but I did think they were all solid across the board, especially when you consider how incredibly challenging it is to bring these characters and these types of environments to screen in a believable manner. I thought the underwater locations looked great. They're highly detailed, loaded with vibrant colors, and there's spaces that were just a pleasure to look at and exist in. As for the digital characters now, well, I did think Sebastian in particular always looked great. There are some moments in the film when elements from the on-land world and elements from the underwater realm come together that slightly missed the mark for me and weakened the overall believability. And then an issue that does catch my eye quite often, apparently, digital backdrops being used during scenes that take place on land. In particular here, there's a balcony space where the backdrop just doesn't look right, and it winds up having the opposite of what I imagined the intended effect was with a shot like that. Rather than make the seascape feel like beautiful and vast, it makes things feel slightly off and small. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up about here. It's score time. I am giving the live-action Little Mermaid movie 3 Deweys out of 5 on the Dewey Decimovie scale. Are there elements of the film that could have been stronger? Yes. But are there components of the film that feel like huge creative achievements? Absolutely. So basically, consider me mixed on the live-action The Little Mermaid movie, but I also need to point out that even with the flaws I mentioned, I enjoyed myself a good deal while watching the film. Oh, I also wanted to include this in the review as well. For anyone out there with kids, it might be worth noting that I was looking forward to seeing this movie with my 4-year-old niece. She is very, very into the animated movie right now. But I do fear that this movie might be a little on the long side for her, and there's also some slower dialogue-heavy moments, especially early on in the film that I'm thinking of, that I do fear might lose her. We are still gonna try. We're gonna go see the movie, but those thoughts crossed my mind while I was at my screening, so I thought I would share that with you as well. And one last point I want to make here. While I don't think this version of The Little Mermaid made the most of the opportunity to refine, enhance, and do new things with this story, there are some changes they made that I thought were done really well. In particular, one of the big ones that comes to mind is I just couldn't believe how much I dug this version of the Kiss the Girls scene. I thought that change was very effective. All right, I'm gonna leave you there with my The Little Mermaid review. If you see the movie this weekend, or ever, hit the comments below. I wanna know what you think about it as well. I will say thank you all so much for watching this review. Please like and share it before you leave it, and stay tuned. I have more reviews coming your way very, very soon. One in mind right now that I'm very excited to tell you about.